Welcome back. There's a lot of attention on the midterms next fall, but another major state Supreme Court race is now less than 6 months away. Justice Rebecca Bradley, a member of the court's now conservative minority, is not seeking another 10-year term on the state's high court. Appeals court judge Chris Taylor, a former Democratic state lawmaker, announced her bid earlier this year in an effort to expand the court's liberal majority.
Now, appeals court judge Maria Lazar has joined the race. A former assistant attorney general during Governor Scott Walker's tenure, Lazar also served as a Waukesha County Circuit Court judge and now on the District 2 Court of Appeals based in Waukesha. Judge Lazar joins us now. Judge, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
We're going to get to a lot of this. I'm first curious broadly, when people will describe you as the conservative candidate in this race, what do you think?
So I think labels are somewhat amusing. I'm first and foremost an independent, impartial judge. Personally, I have conservative viewpoints, but on the bench, I consider myself more independent. You have to have the integrity to issue decisions that don't depend upon a point of view or political persuasion, and that's what I've always done. So I'm amused when people say I'm a conservative judge, because that's not quite accurate. I do have a more conservative judicial philosophy, but I don't think the label fits. And actually, that's one of the reasons why I'm running for this position.
Judge Taylor has said that she is going to talk about her values on the campaign trail in this race. Will you?
Well, you know, I can tell you about my values, but I don't really think it's relevant to the race for a state Supreme Court justice. We take an oath as a judge on the Circuit Court or the Court of Appeals to administer justice without respect to persons. Sounds kind of wonky, doesn't make a lot of sense. I always look at that when I read it. But what it means is we don't look at who the person is, who's in front of us. We look at the facts and the law.
How would you describe the current state Supreme Court?
Well, my concern with the current states, so we'll step back. So when I was a young lawyer, I always looked at the state Supreme Court with kind of awe. Yeah. Sort of like they were my idols. Yes, I know, law geek. They were my idols. They were people I thought were really learned, really knew the law. And maybe they didn't agree, and actually that's a good thing that they don't agree. Look at the U.S. Supreme Court. Ginsburg and Scalia didn't agree, but then they sang opera together. So you have to have people that have different points of view because they bring out a better opinion. The current Supreme Court now is so bitter and so divided, and it's not just the fact that it's a liberal majority, it's the fact that I don't know that they're communicating.
I've heard you strongly criticize the record spending and the political nature of these recent campaigns, most recently the last two. It's become a reality, and it appears a necessity to compete across the state. I'm curious to that, will you accept unlimited donations from, say, the Republican Party of Wisconsin or Republican donors?
Well, okay, there's two questions. So one, first, judges don't fundraise, so I can't ask for money from anyone. That's an ethical rule that's been there, and I follow that to the T. Two, you asked about Republican donors maxing out. There's campaign limits of what people can give, so I follow those rules. Three, you ask about political parties. I actually, quite frankly, would accept funds from any political party that wants to donate to me. Democrat, Republican, Constitution, Green, Libertarian, bring it on.
The last Supreme Court race that we had, President Trump endorsed Brad Schimmel, and Schimmel campaigned on that in the last couple of weeks up into the election. Do you want an endorsement from President Trump?
I'm not looking for any endorsement from President Trump. I would love if everyone in the country on both sides of the political aisle said that I was the better candidate. And if they wanted to do that, I would be great. I'm not out there campaigning for anything like that. And I think that that was part of the problem with the race last year, was that it did get down to a race that was political. It was about endorsements from major politicians. Now, I am talking to politicians in the state of Wisconsin and individuals who are here who I think have a tie to our state, our values, our Midwestern views, and I will talk to them. But all this outside money and all these outside influences are what's damaging our races, and we need to pull back on that.
There's been a lot of talk about recusal. I guess there's always a lot of talk about recusal when you talk about cases and what justices bring to the bench with them. During your time at DOJ, you argued on the other side of Judge Susan Crawford in a Planned Parenthood case.
Yes, I did.
You represented the state in some Act 10 lawsuits.
And I can explain that, and that's important.
Yeah,
So keep going.
I was just going to say, is there a scenario where you would think you would have to recuse yourself, say, from a case involving abortion or Act 10?
All right. So recusal rules are very specific. They're also judge-based, so the judge makes that decision, or the justice. Goes back to a U.S. Supreme Court case, Caperton, just for the law geeks. So what you have to do, though, is you have to look at whether or not there is bias or there is an appearance of impropriety. So on the Act 10 case, all I did when I was at DOJ, we had attorneys. As an assistant attorney general, you're a member of a union, so we had one assistant attorney general who was not, who would argue the cases that had to do with benefits. So my case of Act 10 was purely, was it a law? Did it get passed the right way? It never touched the merits. So any case involving the merits, I would have no basis whatsoever to recuse. Have I recused in the past? Yes. I've recused when I've been asked. I've denied requests for recusal. I've also recused on my own when it's something, when I see a case that comes in front of me. I worked in Waukesha as a circuit court judge for 7 years. Waukesha is one of my counties on the Court of Appeals. When a case comes up, sad to say, I still could have touched it even though I've been off that bench for over 3 years. So I look at those, and if I have to, I recuse. So there are areas that I think judges do have to do that. Act 10, no. The Planned Parenthood case was very specific about a very specific rule, so I would have to look at anything that came about. My opponent worked for Planned Parenthood, not just represented them.
Do you think Justice Hagedorn made the right decision when he said he would recuse from the current Act 10 lawsuit since he was Governor Walker's legal counsel?
Recusal is a personal decision for a judge, and if he determined that he could not be either impartial or it looked like he couldn't be, I'm not going to question him on that. I think that that's a decision that the individual justice has to make.
As you look ahead to the next few months of this campaign, how do you win this campaign? The last two elections have been roughly won by a roughly 10-point victory margin for the Liberal candidate.
Well, on my race for the Court of Appeals, I won by 10 points. So I know those counties are a little bit different than the entire state. But I also think that this race is so simple and so stark. The question is so easy, and it's one question. Do you want to judge me, or do you want a politician wearing a black robe on our highest state court? And I'm very optimistic that they'll say, we actually want to get back to justice. We want to restore our courts. We want to restore integrity. And that's why I think this race is going to be entirely different than anything you've seen before, as well as our outreach to people in the state of Wisconsin. I'm leaving no group, no area, no part, no demographic, no age group unaddressed. I'm going to talk to them all, and I'm going to listen to them all, and I'm going to explain to them all why this race is so very important, even though it doesn't flip a court.
Less than 6 months to go. Judge Maria Lazar, thank you so much. We hope you come back. Great
I will.
having you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Up next, the government shut down airport debate.